We're going to end our finance unit. We're going to, in particular, the loans portion of it by talking about mortgages. Mortgages are loans you get for your house, so really big loans. And we're going to keep this conversation relatively simple and limited. I like to have really rich conversations in class, but I let that last video go too long. And just talking to my laptop isn't as rich of a conversation. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. A few items of vocabulary that we're going to need that are specific to mortgages. First of all, we're going to focus on simple mortgages, straightforward ones that are a lot like our other loans, which are going to be fixed rate mortgages. And that's going to be where the interest rate stays the same. There's a lot of different products out there for mortgages, but we're going to stick with just a fixed rate, interest rate stays the same type of a mortgage. Another thing associated with mortgages is down payments. So historically, you always had to put down, and what we're going to go with is going to be the 20% of the cost of the home you're buying. You had to have that in cash up front in order to get a mortgage. People got into some problems when a lot of these other products came out that didn't require maybe that much, and they got creative with other options, and that's part of what contributed to some of the housing market issues, which again, I'm going to try to not talk about. It's hard not to, because it's so interesting to talk about with students. Let's move on though. Also with mortgages are closing costs. Closing costs can be everything from, you think about if you buy something, there's paperwork. It's, I guess, a simple way to say it. You go to like a title company, and there's a lot of paperwork. Sometimes there's attorneys. There's just a lot of extra costs associated with these really big mortgages. In particular, there's something called points that sometimes gets lumped in with this notion of closing costs, or sometimes they talk about them separately. Points or origination fees are just extra fees on top of what the loan is. So basically, if a lender says they charge you 1 point, it is 1 percentage point of whatever the loan is for. So if you're getting a $200,000 loan, they're going to charge you an extra 1% of that, so an extra $2,000 is the kind of just an added on cost. So those are a few things to be aware of. But let's go ahead and get started with a kind of a straightforward example, I hope, here initially. So what we have is a condo that's $150,000, and we're going to buy it. We have been saving. We have 20% to put down. So remember that 20% is 20% of, so of means multiplied by that 150,000. So we have saved up $30,000 that we're putting down as cash up front. So we now need what is remaining, this 120,000. That's what we need our loan for. So we are getting a loan for 120. So that is what the mortgage will be for. That's what the loan amount is. So in order to figure out kind of the usual questions I ask, monthly payment, total that we pay, let's go ahead and just do exactly what we did last time, which is the payment function. All right, what is our rate? Our rate is 6.4%, and we need to divide that by 12 because everything I do with loans for you is going to be based on monthly cycles. Here's your reminder down here. The rate is per period. So if it was quarterly, you would divide by 4. We're dividing by 12. The total number of payments in the loan. Well, we have this loan for 30 years times we're making payments every month, so 12 months in a year. So 360 payments is what we'll be making, 360 months there. And the present value of the loan is this $120,000. So our loan will amount to a monthly payment of $750.61. So that is our monthly payment. Now, the next question I ask is, what is the total amount that you pay over the course of the loan? All right, well, just like before, to figure out the total that we pay, we're going to take the monthly payment times the number of times we made that payment, which again is we made 360 of those payments, or if you prefer, 12 months a year times 30 years. So the total that we pay over the course of the loan, so our total amount we pay is this $272.19. Now, if I just want to know how much I paid in interest, well, that, just like our other loans, to figure out the amount that we've paid in interest, it's the total we've paid minus what the loan was for. The loan was for 120,000. So the remaining 150,000 plus, that is what we paid in interest. That's how much the bank made off of us. So if you think back, this is over the cost of the house. The house was 150,000. We put 30 grand already down. Don't forget that. We already spent 30 grand on it. That was like immediately. And so the loan was for 120, and after I did that loan, it came out that I had to spend an extra 150 in interest. So the amount that I got charged in interest was actually more than the actual cost of the condo. I paid more in interest than was the actual cost of the condo. Now, I will say this is very common. Um, my interest rate in this example, 6.4%, is a little high from when I first wrote these materials probably, and where we are now. Certainly mortgage rates are less than that today, but that's really in line with I paid 6 point something percent on my first townhouse I bought. So it's definitely within, the realm of reasonableness. So people often wonder then, like, why would I ever do that? Why would I spend 150,000 more than what the actual house was in interest? And the theory is this, and different people have different feelings on this, but if you have to spend this much a month anyway, meaning you're going to have to at least rent something, right? Um, at least at the end of the day, you own something. 30 years later, you now own this townhouse. Or let's say 15 years later, you try to sell it and then you move somewhere, do something different. You hope that maybe you can recoup and get back this amount of money if you're able to sell your house for hopefully a little bit more than what you bought it for. Although the assumption that houses always increase is something that was proven false when the bubble kind of burst. There are other things to consider, and then I'll stop rambling here. You have to pay property taxes. There's other costs associated with owning a house, but um, it's definitely not something that you want to do if you're not sure of your future and where you want to be. If you want the freedom to up and move somewhere, not a good choice. If you're relatively stable where you're at, it may be something to consider. So I'm not trying to give anyone financial advice. So, but it definitely is something that, a lot of people do end up doing in their lives. So let's look at what this would like and what we look like in an amortization table. So that's really going to be similar to the tables we've made before, except we're going to add a couple of columns to the end. But let's create the basic table that we always have. We start off with our months here, and the months need to extend down to 360. I don't remember if I went that far or not. I did not, because that's the 360. That was our 30 years, right? 30 times 12. There we go. Okay. And then I'm starting off with my beginning balance. My beginning balance is 120,000. My monthly payment in this situation is the 750.61. My interest charge is 6.4% or 0.064, whichever way, but divided by 12, right? This is monthly. And then I multiply that by my beginning balance, and my end balance equals, as always, your beginning balance minus that payment you sent in plus that interest they're going to charge you. And then, of course, your new balance is equal to your old end balance. So the first thing, let's just double click on these last formulas we put in. It'll all make sense once it's all filled. And let's scroll on down and just make sure that it looks right, that we get paid off by month 360. And so as we get down to the bottom, yep, that's the first month that I go negative. And so this is the best to the nearest penny I can get within $3.16. In reality, you would call within the last month if you're halfway through and they tell you what you owe to that day, in terms of the payment and interest. All right, so what's this amortization thing about? So one thing I do want you to observe, although I don't think there's much in this in your activities or in the assignment, but just to observe something. When you send in that monthly payment, they immediately take the interest. So the amount of the payment that goes to interest is whatever they're charging you in interest. Those are one and the same. They're taking their payment right off the top. So what does that mean? That means that you only have paid down the monthly payment minus that interest. So that remaining 110, that's the only amount that actually went to paying down your actual loan or your principal balance. So they took 640. You sent in 750. They took 640 and put it in their pocket. They left the remaining 110 and they paid down your balance. So you still owe, after 1 month, 119,889. So the trend I want you to observe is what happens over time. And this is sort of a common knowledge thing that people talk about with mortgages, which is in the beginning, most of your payment is going towards interest and not a lot to principal. This is why, unless you can, be prepared to stay in a place for, a number of years, or if you knew for sure that the housing market would continue to increase, that would be great, but nobody knows that anymore. So the problem is, you can be somewhere for a number of years and feel like you have just paid down a ton on your mortgage, and you've maybe only paid it down by $5,000. And that sometimes isn't enough. You may not be able to sell your house for exactly that amount or for more than that. Then there's fees like with realtors and things like that. So that's a risk. So you want to be careful about things like that. But notice these last two columns here, what happens over time. They start to balance out a little bit. You start to pay less towards principal, less towards interest, more towards principal. And by the time you kind of get towards the end, it shifts in the other direction. So now you're paying more to your principal, less to interest. And the reason is that you simply have a smaller balance. So when they charge you 6.4% of a smaller balance, it's less of an interest charge. And by the end, the bulk is going towards the principal or the loan and not as much as towards interest. So that's just a trend that it's good consumer knowledge, I guess I would say. And it's just something I want you to be aware of. So that's this trend. So observe this trend in money, how at the beginning, most goes to interest and not that much to principal, and how that shifts as you go further along. These next two parts I'm going to skip over. There's nothing like it in your homework. I will just mention this, save us some time in the video, but in class I would definitely go through this, which is this notion of a lot of times people talk about if you just make one extra payment towards your mortgage a year, you can a lot of times save $6,000 or $7,000. You can sometimes save 6 years on your mortgage. It's kind of amazing what one extra check or one extra payment will do. And normally I would go through the math of all of that, but just kind of keep that somewhere in the back of your mind. And FYI, if you get paid every 2 weeks, there's always going to be 2 months in the year when you have quote unquote an extra check, because getting paid every 2 weeks gives you 26 checks a year, not 24. And so there's 2 months that you will have a extra check. So some people say, take one of those, put it towards your mortgage. If you do that once a year, you can like cut 6 years off of your mortgage. It's a thing that we could have modeled in class, but I'll just kind of give you that little tidbit there. So it's not in any of the activities or the homework. So let's go ahead and go on to what is. So now we're continuing with the same scenario. Suppose that you sold that condo, so kind of continue with it, and now you want to buy a house that's, you're upsizing, and you're going to buy a house that is $220,000. And from the sale of your condo, and this is always the hope, that maybe it's, a number of years later, we hope that home prices have held steady or increased. That's the big variable now that we can't always count on. And you hope that you're able to sell it maybe for more than what you bought it for. That's always the goal. And that then you can take that money and put it towards something else. So in this case, you're going to put it towards this house. So suppose that from the sale of your condo and some additional money that you've saved, you're able to put down that 20%. So again, here's the whole notion of putting 20% down. So that is 20% of that loan, which is 20% of the home value, which is 220. So 20% of 220 is 44,000. So that's how much you had to just give them cash down on this house. So it is the remaining amount that you actually need your mortgage for, 176. Here we have two options. So we have Bank A with a 30-year 7%. Again, these are high for today, but the lessons are still the same. So 30 years, 7% fixed rate loan, closing costs of $500 plus 1 point. And then Bank B, we're going to have a 30-year 6.9% fixed rate loan, closing costs of $800 plus 2 points. So we're going to compare these two and decide which is a better deal. So what we want to do, let's just go to an empty spreadsheet here, and let's use our payment function. So payment function, and our first rate on our first bank is 7%. So we have our 7% divided by 12. Total number, we're sticking with, there's 15 years and 30 years, both are common. We're doing 30 years. So the 30 times the 12 is the 360, or make Excel do it, the 30 times the 12. And our loan amount is for the 176. We've already put down 44,000. So the first loan is going to result in a monthly payment of $1170.93. So the first part would be figuring out the total that we have from those payments. So remember, that's always whatever your monthly payment is times the number of months you make that payment, so times that 360. So there's our 421,534. So that's the total from the payments. So this is the total of your payments that you sent in. All right, now the next piece of it is there are these closing costs. And in this case, there's just like this $500. So the price of doing business, right? Paperwork and maybe attorneys and who knows. Okay. Now, in addition, this bank is also closing costs 1 point plus 1 point. So this point really means 1 percentage point of what the loan is for. So that means we're going to do 1% or 0.01, whichever you prefer, times what the loan was for. And the loan here was for $176,000. So there's where we end up with an extra $1,760. So if I add up the total from my payments plus these two initial extra fees, the closing costs plus that 1 point, I get that this bank is going to cost me in total, after all 30 years, the total would have been this $423,794.80. All right, next one, Bank B. All right, so Bank B, let's again do our monthly payment. So equals payment. This rate seems pretty darn close, and it is. It's 6.9% divided by 12. Again, 360 payments, and I'm starting with the same loan amount of $176,000. So once again, I have the same costs I want to calculate. So my total of my payments is my monthly payment times the 360. So there's my $417,290.40. My closing costs, well, this one says there's $800 in closing costs that they're going to tack on. And in addition to that, they say plus 2 points. And again, some places would lump that underneath of the closing costs. They may actually have that, but this says in addition, there's going to be another 2 points. So 2 points now means 2% of that loan amount. And so in this case, that's going to be 0.02, or if you prefer, in Excel, you can say 2% of, again, the loan is for $176,000. So once again, same types of calculations that we want to total. So the total of all my payments, the closing costs, the points, and so that loan costs me in total $421,610.40. So in this one, which one is going to cost me less? It looks like it's going to be Bank B, not by much. But what I really wanted to highlight here is that Bank B had larger closing costs, more points costs, but in the end was still less because of that 0.1% lower interest rate. So it's amazing what an interest rate does over 30 years, right? That's kind of the lesson. So Bank B is the better deal. However, I will say this, if you weren't in it for the long haul, if you were only looking at doing this maybe for a few years and you had this goal of selling and moving on, which I'm not saying is a good idea, then these upfront costs might actually outweigh that 0.1%. The difference in that 0.1% is really what accumulates over the 30 years. So, I mean, there's so many interesting things for us to consider and talk about if we were face to face. So again, you can kind of just read through this. I would say don't look at your monthly payment only. There's so many things that got people into trouble. And it wasn't just fixed rate mortgages. There's things called ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages, and a lot of times they have lower interest rates, but they're not guaranteed. And sometimes those are reasonable risks, and this is where you talk to people who have more experience in these types of things. But the real risky thing that a lot of people ran into, if you read, is something called interest-only loans. It just sounds bad. And they were basically taking out a loan just to pay interest. It was paying nothing in their principal. The whole premise of that was that these homes would continue to increase in price. And when they didn't, people were in all sorts of trouble with things like that. And there's others too. People had other types of creative loan models. I could talk about friends and all sorts of things. But you always just want to think about what's the worst case scenario that you could get into with some of these loans and make sure that you'd be okay. Don't focus on like, oh, in the best of times, focus on, okay, well, what would happen in the worst of times and could I still afford it? And that's always just a good thing to think about. So that's going to wrap up our discussion on loans and mortgages. So I think group activity 21, I'm going to take a quick peek here. I think I like the look of it all. Yes. Student loan, a couple of mortgage loans, doing some comparing. And just make sure you realize, so you're setting up, this is here to help you on the next page here. And then in the assignment, though, there was something, and at least for my students, I'll make sure I post this, but I am going to omit, I think in number 2, I'm going to omit C through F. That's something I would have helped you set up in class, so we'll just omit that for this semester. It's really the more true nature of what happens with people with credit cards. They typically don't just have one big, $1,500 charge and then I never charge anything. This is based on the premise, suppose you keep charging like $100 a month, and it's like, yikes, sometimes you just literally will never pay it off, and credit cards can be scary that way. Scarier yet can be payday and title loans. I talk about those in class too, if we had the time. And let's see, the rest of this I think looks okay. So that's it. And so actually this is the last video. This will be the end of it for the semester. So for my students, once you're done with this assignment, you'll have one more test, a unit test on finance, and for some of you, the final this semester is optional given the situation we're in. So this is the last video.